You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter. Thanks for joining us on Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, January 22nd, and we wanted to offer a bit of bonus content this Thursday. Typically, we're committed to one episode a week, but with the timing of everything happening this week, we wanted to release this episode today as well, because tomorrow, Friday, January 23rd, many activists are planning a general strike across the state of Minnesota. They're urging for people not to go to work, not to go to school, not to shop, and it's got the support of lawmakers and workers' unions alike. But it's rooted and organized and promoted largely by faith leaders, specifically one faith group called Isaiah, a multi-faith nonprofit based here in the Twin Cities. So ahead of tomorrow, I wanted to sit down with a leader from Isaiah who talked about how this plan for a general strike came to be and how she sees the role of faith leaders in protests like this one. So now, here is Minister Janae Bates Imari of Isaiah. Well, we now welcome on a very special guest and also a very busy guest, so we appreciate you making time. This is Minister Janae Bates Imari, the co-executive director at Isaiah, which is a multi-faith nonprofit right here in the Twin Cities. You have had an incredibly busy last couple of weeks, but for the people listening that maybe don't know, what has Isaiah as an organization been up to, say, over the course of the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, so Isaiah and Faith in Minnesota, our sister organization, has been quite busy in the most unfortunate reasons. But it's actually important to start with what happened even before the murder of Renee Good and the surge that we're seeing in the cities and in Minnesota writ large. In December, Isaiah, we held our statewide convention where we had 5,000 of our leaders across the state come together. And it was after a year-long process of people of faith in churches, in mosques, also in barbershops, in child care centers. We organized 600 child care centers, in farm families in rural Minnesota, and in manufactured home parks across the state. All came together, 5,000 of us came together at the Minneapolis Convention Center to talk about the way in which people across the state, people of goodwill, and people of faith are called in this time. And at that moment, on December 13th, we were naming the ways in which our state has been under siege already, the way in which we were being attacked. Our Muslim neighbors and Somali neighbors were being treated as perpetual suspects. And were being used as a kind of a political football at every level of government we were starting to see and feel. And, of course, in the ways in which our immigrant neighbors were being targeted by ICE agents. At that time, we had believed that we were at like 800 or 900 ICE agents, which had already surpassed where, for example, Chicago's height of their surge was at 800. And so we were naming what is our own particular call in this time, what is our own role, how should we consider ourselves? And we thought a lot about things like the Montgomery bus boycott and the kind of organizing that had to take place when they met at a place called Holt Street Baptist Church, and where they heard, incredible and prolific speeches about what it is to come together, to recognize our connection, our interconnectedness as human beings, to be in unity and to organize. Not just like that a call to action will all of a sudden get everyone moving, but what does it mean to take responsibility for one another, to take responsibility and accountability for what you are trying to create in the world. You cast a vision and then you do the work to make it happen. And so in that meeting on December 13th, that's what we launched. We had no idea the way in which it would need to be implemented, and we'd have to manifest that plan much faster than we thought in the start of this year. And so, Minneapolis had already felt this surge of ICE agents in its streets, and most certainly that drumbeat, that horrific sounding drumbeat had continued, and to the point of the murder of Renee Good, which, as horrific as her life being taken is, it also was not surprising for many people who live in this state because of the way in which the search has happened, because of the way that we have seen ICE agents act irrationally, unaccountably. And I do believe her murder, something that now I've seen a poll very recently that's named that like 82% of Americans have actually watched at least one video of her death. And it makes me wonder what is happening to the soul of us as human beings to watch a public killing of someone and to also have elected leadership at the highest level of government tell us that we shouldn't believe our eyes, or to try to validate the loss of life, to do what he can to make to make the fact that a human being who is deserving of dignity and agency, to make her life less than that. And I think that there is a call for all of us, especially people of faith, to be able to declare what is truth in this time, separate from partisanship, separate from ideological sides. What does it actually mean to stand in truth? What does it mean to stand in value? And for us of faith, what does it mean to lean into God Creator right now?
So you talk about the meeting with everyone back in mid-December.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about how what we saw in early January essentially amplified everything. How quickly did the wheels start to turn of, okay, we need to have some sort of action that's associated with what's going on here in terms of a response?
Oh, it was immediate. It was immediate. I mean, I think, there was the initial response of, oh my God, someone is dead. And ICE agents killed this person. And then it was, of course, someone is dead, and an ICE agent killed them. And the feeling of, yeah, of course this happened. This was predictable. We could not let that settle into, and this is our new normal. And I think the level of fear that has been kind of pushed into community because of what's happening, the fact that neighbors have been showing up for each other, doing all that they can around, giving children rides to school and making sure their neighbors have meals, and recognizing that Minnesotans have learned, frankly, through some of the hardest things, learned how to care for each other in really hard times, but recognizing the ways in which that has been so taxing when simultaneously we are under occupation from federal troops that are, they're not the troops of the military, they are agents, but in the thousands. When you are told that you and your neighbors are worthless or garbage by the President of the United States, when you are told a day of reckoning is coming, when we're trying to care for each other, it can be demoralizing. And the way in which we know that faith leaders have a moral authority right now and a moral role to stand up and say, this is an abomination, what is happening, and that we have a role to call out sin for sin and evil for evil, and to name that we also have the ability to start to cast the vision and do the work to make good happen. And so it was a no-brainer and a very clear need that immediately we have to get into action. We have to ensure that people are safe and that people are lifting up their voices and doing all we can to show the world the way in which Minnesotans care for each other, the way in which we protest loudly and boldly and courageously and peacefully, And I sometimes I get a little frustrated by the way in which we've had to use rhetoric over and over again about we're having peaceful protests, because literally that's what Minnesotans do. It is something we embody, is protest. We've had to stand up for those who have been harmed, hurt, surveyed, and killed. And the idea about the notion of needing to say peace over and over and over again is wild, because it's not us that's not being peaceful. It's not us who are causing and wreaking havoc in our communities. It's not us who's going door to door, yanking people out of their homes. It's not us patrolling our streets with giant guns, freaking out children, making them afraid. It's not us going into child care centers and taking educators. It's not us going into hospitals, handcuffing people to their sick beds. It's not us who are being violent. And yet we're the ones who are having to say we're peacefully protesting on behalf of these people, on behalf of our neighbors, on behalf of us. And so I think that if ever there were a time, it is a time now for people of faith, for Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, to stand up and say, this is wrong, this is evil, and we have to continue to lift up our voices. We have to say that there is no way that we're going to just be silent. And we do this with courage. I don't say unafraid, because there is much to fear, but there's so much more to be courageous about.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation talking about some of the ways that the faith community played a role in like the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. And there were churches and ministers and reverends and people that were very influential in that movement. Mm-hmm. We're looking ahead of an event this Friday. Yeah. Do you see parallels where it's like, this is the faith community, we are stepping up? There is essentially a boycott happening this Friday. Do you see those parallels? And then also, what is happening this upcoming Friday? We're taping this Tuesday, January 20th. Yeah. We're looking ahead to Friday, January 23rd. Yeah. So do you see the parallels? And then what is the plan?
Oh, absolutely. There are definite parallels. I mean, so what we're calling for on Friday, and faith communities in particular are calling it a day of prayer and fasting for truth and freedom. There are hundreds of labor unions and community groups who are calling it a day of truth and freedom. And I think it's really important, especially as faith communities, that we are naming explicitly this aspect of prayer and fasting. We find prayer and fasting for those of us of faith know that it is a transformative practice. And we are in a situation where we all need to be transformed into the best versions of ourselves and able to really embody the kind of prophetic courage that is needed right now. But I'd also say that this is absolutely within the ancestry and heritage of us, those through most certainly the civil rights era, but also through abolition of those enslaved folks here right on this in this country. And I think about, the fact that even naming with just yesterday, I mean, if we're talking on Tuesday, just yesterday, we celebrated the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and all that he stood for. And the day before he was murdered, he gave a speech that has been memorialized and played over and over again. But that speech was in solidarity with sanitation workers who were striking. It was it was a rallying cry to America that we have to stand with those who are oppressed, those who are hurt, who are under the thumb of injustice, and that the notion of a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And he ended that speech naming that he had been to the mountaintop and that he had seen the promised land. And most certainly there's the continuation of when he continues, he talks about how he may not get there. But I think the beauty of it is him being able to say that he knows that there is better out there than what we currently see. And that what is required of us is to stand in unity with one another, in solidarity with one another, to mourn when others mourn, to weep when others weep, to not turn our eye away from what is happening. And he was calling for a real economic shift that needed to happen in order to get the gaze of those who have been silent for so long, those in corporations, those who sit in high seats and believe that they can remain untouched as people are hurting and dying. And he was calling for that, knowing that the call for that would get people to operate together in unity. That creates that notion of a promised land. That it's us coming together across race, place, class, standing together, doing the work together. That is what creates this idea of a promised land, that it is possible, but it is only possible when we choose to be together.
So you talk about prayer. There's going to be prayer. There's
Yes.
going to be fasting.
Yes.
You talked about, just a moment ago, just some of the economic impact. But for those who don't know or haven't heard by this point,
Yeah.
this Friday, what is the plan?
We are calling for no work, no school, no shopping. So we're trying to make sure that people have what they need now, so that they can, get your groceries done your grocery shopping done a little early, or fill up your car if you need to before Friday. And then, of course, try to do all that you can at small businesses. But businesses across the state already have declared that they're closing their doors, both in solidarity for this action, also to allow their employees to be able to take part in the many actions happening across the state. Faith communities are opening their doors to provide warming centers, but also food spaces, prayer spaces, lament spaces. There will be a very large march happening in the city of Minneapolis, but there are also solidarity and echo marches happening all across the state. From Rochester to Duluth, we know that there's lots of things being planned there as well. But the top line is that folks will not be going to work, school, or shopping on Friday. And it is, for some, have some been calling an economic blackout, in order to lift our voices collectively together in a unified way, and in a way that I do believe helps to paint more of that vision of what a promised land could be for us, knowing that what we currently see does not have to be.
The one thing I've been asking faith leaders as I talk to them today, as we've taped multiple interviews on Tuesday, is the question of, is what's happening in the Twin Cities this month and last month, is it at its core a faith issue? Mm-hmm. How would you respond to that?
Absolutely, it's a faith issue. My response would be, when you see people hurting, when you see people grieving, when you see people being taken from their homes, when you see people, elderly folks, being walked out of their house in their boxers with their bruised knees, when you see teenagers being snatched out of their place of employment as they scream, "I'm a citizen, call my mom," how dare any of us not lean to our Creator and cry out, "How long, Lord?" And then listen and discern what the response is for you. Because I know that of every video I've watched, every time I drive down the street and I see agents and I see the way Minnesotans show up blowing their whistles with their cameras out, my instinct is, "How long, Lord?" And the response, the discernment in my time of prayer and fasting, what I hear consistently and loudly is, it's time. Move your feet. Lift your voice. And if that's the response to how long, the only way I could understand that is, it's how long are you going to sit and let it happen? And people of faith have to wrestle with that question.
One pastor I talked to today described it as a spiritual battle that's happening.
Yeah.
Are you someone who believes this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I also, I come out of a charismatic church, and I wholeheartedly believe that what we wrestle against is not flesh and blood, but powers and principalities, and that those powers and principalities take hold of people who make decisions. But no human being is irredeemable. And I pray for the souls of all of those in our state, including ICE agents. I pray for the soul of our president. I do think that there is always a possibility that they change their minds, they make different decisions, they make different choices. And my God, I pray that that happens. And in the meantime, I and many, many, many thousands of others are doing what we can to protect those who are being harmed by these decisions and by these actions. And then in the spirit realm, I wholeheartedly believe that those powers and principalities, those evil forces, are doing what they can to keep us afraid, to keep us quiet, to keep us silent, to keep us divided, to spew stories that say that we shouldn't work together, that we shouldn't trust each other, that because this person prays differently, you shouldn't be with them, because this person thinks differently, looks differently, you shouldn't be with them. And then I can't help but think about the Good Samaritan. In the story of the Good Samaritan, thinking about the fact that so many walked past that person because they didn't look like them, they weren't part of their religion, they were supposedly unclean. But we celebrate that Samaritan as good. Why? And are we actually good in this situation? Are we good in this story of our lives? Are we good in history books 20, 30 years from now? That's what we have to wrestle with.
If people were to take away one thing from hearing from you, I mean, what would you want that to be?
I would just say, in this time, in this era, think about the fact, and I want to speak, I'm speaking most certainly, I understand we have folks across all different faiths, but I am very specifically thinking about my Christian comrades right now. My brothers and sisters, siblings of faith, of Christian faith, because our faith in particular is being weaponized in this moment. It is our scriptures, it is our divine words that are being leveraged in very harmful, hateful ways. And I implore all of us to consider what our text says about welcoming the stranger, about loving our neighbor, about caring for those who are downtrodden, who are oppressed, who are incarcerated, and to really take the time to hear God's voice. Not all of the chatter of all of the things, not even Minister Janae Bates Imari, but to hear God's voice, truly, and what God is calling you to do in this time. And most certainly, I welcome everyone to join us on Friday in prayer and fasting for truth and freedom.
You've been great with your time. Minister Janae Bates Imari joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank
absolutely.
you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much again for giving us part of your time today. If this is your first time listening to Bigger Than Belief, thank you for checking out our podcast. We post episodes every single week, and we are an interfaith podcast through WCCO TV right here in the Twin Cities. And the goal of this show is to share real faith stories of people living out their faith in our community and beyond, but it's also to understand the big issues and the big problems we're seeing in our community through a faith lens. If you enjoyed this episode or found it interesting in any way, please follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen. Also, please rate this podcast 5 stars. That helps us be seen by many more people. Lastly, please share this with a friend or tell a friend about us or just this episode. We'll be right back Thursday, January 29th with more episodes and more people talking about what we're seeing right now in the Twin Cities, understanding this conflict we're seeing through a faith lens. We're going to have more episodes coming up next week and the weeks to follow. But again, our next episode coming January 29th. In the meantime, folks, please stay safe, stay warm, and we will see you very soon.